Hi, welcome. My name's Andy. This week we're going to have a look at another passage in Matthew. We're going to look at Matthew 18 verses 15 to 20. Now this is an amazing, beautiful, mind-expanding passage. It's amazing. First, we're going to just have a little think about who Matthew was. Now we don't really know, but what we do know about Matthew's gospel as distinct from the other. Remember, there are 4 Gospels which tell the story of Jesus' life. And Matthew is just one of those. But now some of the unique features which are going to be important for this. We're going to identify some of these first. Okay, firstly, do you remember, if you watched last week's video, do you remember one of the Greek words that I taught you, which was mathetes, the word for disciple, for teaching? Did you spot the connection? The word Matthew is very similar to mathetes. And there's a kind of school of thought that the name Matthew was invented to represent the book of teaching. Now, and that's certainly true in the context. The content of the book is that there is a lot more instruction, things about how to live out the Christian life. So Matthew is in some ways a book of teaching. And therefore, it's also a book aimed at the church. It's the book where the church is mentioned in the New Testament, written very much for Matthew's own community. That church, we think, was probably made of Jewish converts, which explains the third thing I want to focus on in Matthew's Gospel, is that it contains lots and lots of Jewish features, lots of references back to the Old Testament and Jewish customs. And we're going to look at some of those today. Okay, so that's some of the distinctive features of Matthew as a Gospel. Okay, now we're going to start right back at what the Jewish people would consider is the start of their story. In the book of Exodus, the burning bush. You probably know this story already, but Moses, who is to become the great hero in the Jewish faith, Moses was in the wilderness one day and he saw a burning bush. And the bush was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. And as the story goes on, God revealed himself at that time to Moses. And Moses asked what God's name was, and God revealed his name as this. 4 letters, which was not really a word. It's very difficult to say, but YHWH, which is where we get the word Yahweh or Jehovah from. And it translates in English it doesn't translate exactly, but it means I am, or I will be, or I am becoming, a sense of just pure being. Now, just an aside, I love this. There's a thought that the word Yahweh sounds a bit like, when you pronounce it in the proper way, sounds like breathing. It's pronounced Yod, Hey, Va, Hey, Yod, Hey, Va, Hey, which is a bit like breathing in and out twice. Okay, now, also, I love this. When you breathe in, we say we inspire. And when you breathe out, you expire. And the word spire there means in-breath, out-breath, is where we get the word spirit from as well. It's got the same root. So the name of God is the name of breathing in and out the Spirit. Okay, so that's a foundational story, absolutely crucial. Matthew would have known this inside out. The burning bush is where God first revealed himself, where the heavenly realm burst into the natural realm. Okay, now, as time went on, the Jewish people would come to realize that this wasn't just a one-off event with Moses. And there was an understanding, again, Matthew would have known this, there was an understanding that whenever two people met to study the Torah, the Jewish scriptures, what we now would call the Old Testament, whenever two people met to study the Torah, they had a sense that God was there with them. And the phrase they use for that is the Shekinah. Forgive my pronunciation if you know better than me, but the Shekinah is the sense that God is present whenever two people meet together. Two or three people at least meet together to study the Jewish scriptures. Okay? Now, in this passage, we get a saying of Jesus which completely blows this wider and wider and wider. Remember, we started with Moses, just this one-off experience of God meeting with people. Then it was whenever two people met. Now, there would have been Jewish men. Studying the scripture would have happened in a special building called a synagogue or the temple early on. But now Jesus takes this and he blows it wide as it can get, as encompassing as it can get. He says, whenever, any time that two or three people gather in his name. Now this is anyone. Any people meet together, and this can happen anywhere. This isn't tied to the synagogue or a building anymore. Then let's see what happens. Jesus said, "For when two or three are gathered in my name, I am there among them." I am. Now, did you spot that? Sometimes in our English Bibles, that gets translated as when two or three are gathered in my name, I'm there among them, as if the word I am was nothing special. But of course, the word I am would immediately make people think back to Yahweh, the divine presence, the creator. So in this passage, Jesus is saying that whenever two people meet together, the divine presence will be with them. It's an amazing thing. Also, did you get the link back to the Jewish people studying the Torah whenever two or three people meet together? So Jesus is saying this is not just something, so that where the divine meets us, it's not tied down to men anymore. It's not tied, well, probably never was, but you know, if we think that the divine presence is reliant on men meeting, it's anybody. And it's not tied down to a particular building. Whenever two or three people gather in my name, I am there among them. That's why I've called this video Heaven and Nature Sing, because the two realms, the heavenly realm, the earthly realm, are far more closely connected than we often realise. There's a beautiful poem from the Victorian times which had a line, "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God." Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. The world is packed full of God's presence. It's quite easy to miss, and we're going to think about that next week. But the earth is packed full with heaven. Heaven and nature sing along together. They're not as distinct as we sometimes think. Or in another way, a very famous poet said, "They say in heaven love comes first. We'll make heaven a place on earth." Okay, I pray that you'll increasingly come to recognize that heaven and earth sing along. They're together all the time. And that whenever you meet with other people, God is present in that meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye.